And we wrote this poem very soon after I was first undergoing chemotherapy, and I was very interested in what was happening with the DNA in my body, because I was diagnosed as also being a BRCA2 carrier. And I asked him loads of questions about the structure of DNA and how mine was different and why this had happened. And we began to write a poem, which was a joint poem. I wrote one strand and he wrote the other, and they interweave like the sort of classic structure of a DNA image. But they are also, each line within it contains patterning connected with DNA, and contains different letters which relate to the DNA code. If Pietro was here, he'd be able to explain that much better than me. But anyway, I will read my strand of the poem. It's called DNA Time. All child time contains patterned acts, foreign, rare, franked stamps, hinged commemoratives, catalogued according to Gibbons, scales practiced daily, tiny skyscrapers arranged, jigsaw corners searched and selected, mammal tracks magnified, golden leaves traced, petals sought, picked, flattened beneath encyclopedias. Spirograph created intricate images, felt tip colours and Caran d'Ache pencils shaded within margins. Early evening battleships, drafts, chessmen, Chinese checkers threatened, plastic counters crept along ladders, avoiding gigantic coiled snakes. Continuous knitting clicked, lengthening scarves, V-necks, cardigans. Green, lilac, scarlet raffia roughly plaited, forming bracelets, baskets, gaudy placemats, steps strung together, decoded dances. Dad swept spiraling wood shavings clear, stunning magenta dahlias cast cacti symmetry. After choral chanting all the timetables, splashing each other with R60, learning Friday word lists, hardest definitely Egypt. Night time's tepid bathwater trickled out, sparkling scattered stars, craft landings, and Armstrong's moonwalks demanded avid attention. Fancy R's, italic T's, time-consuming gallant G's took shape into phrases, ascribed meanings. Shakespeare's glorious cadences, Hugh's landscapes, and Hardy's call struck receptive ears with poetic ideas. Gradually, cycles changed, floors challenged, family gatherings demanded patience, monthlies stretched pain thresholds, fortnightly swimming, especially front crawl, brought terrible cramp. Grammaire française became taxing, scary, Deutsche Grammatik enticed with strangeness. Painting, charcoal drawing, sketching remained good. Claywork cracked after firing. Friday disco nights lacked handsome partners. Gym handstands generally stayed sitting. Each morning and all precious girl time, repeating helical DNA chains, threaded, then rethreaded, anti-parallel strands, creating proteins and translating RNA transcripts into genetic tales, silently secreting an enigmatic watermark, ancient spelling mistake, framing relentless toxic density, spearheading eventual attacks, aimed at concealed, unsuspecting, vulnerable targets, instigating hereditary hurt.
Wow, thank you so much. Yeah. Love that, Sue. Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow, yeah.
I don't know what else to say, so I'll leave other people to say what they'd like to say.
Oh, Sue, thank you so much. That was so full on. The complete grappling with the world of DNA. I like the way you also included, well, I liked how universal the material was that came into your view. So grammaire française and child time patterned acts, as well as more rigorous material.
Thank you, thank you. I really wanted to capture that all that patterning that happens, you know, throughout your childhood and the games you play and what you
and not
learn.
taking it metaphorically. I mean, I'm sure there were more metaphors in there that I would grasp if I was able to read it. But one way might abuse writing with science is to kind of treat it as a quarry for metaphors.
Yeah.
Go right for it, and I think that's very important. So I'm really moved to have heard your poem.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I can certainly share a copy with you if you like.
I'd love.
Yeah. If you put your email address in the chat, I can send you a copy.
Okay, I'll do my best.
I really enjoyed the
in more, won't it? Yes. Chat. Yes,
yeah,
here we
chat,
go.
yeah.
Okay.
I got a real sense that kind of DNA is kind of so supportive in everything in life.
Yeah.
You know, from that poem, it's like some kind of scaffold that we're all built upon, really.
And what I found really moving was the way in which you had so much invested in understanding it. And that gave the whole poem a most tremendous vigor and weight.
Thank you.
You couldn't possibly have achieved by simply describing the molecules. And I think this is almost one of the most difficult things, finding a way in to write poetry about molecules. But this was just very powerful indeed, I found.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
I was just going to say, I quite enjoyed the sort of extended descriptions of the different items of cloth that were woven and how that played into the weaving of the DNA and how that makes us and all of our different positives and perhaps also those things that come about that we, you know, that cause us trouble, like the cancer was. So I thought that was quite a vivid image that worked really well as a centerpiece.
Thank you very much, Miranda.
So from that piece, were you said it was written with the other person?
Yeah.
Are they two separate pieces that are?
No, they interweave. So he's written what's called the anti-strand, if you like, and he takes a much more sort of much less personal view. So it's very much the scientist talking.
So when you read it, is it his voice, your voice, his voice, your voice in that way? If you read it together.
The poem, my poem goes like that, and then his starts at the bottom and weaves back up.
Wow.
So we tend to I read mine and then he reads his strand, if you like. Yeah, but I can certainly send you a copy if you'd like to see it.
Thank you. I'll put mine in there as well.
Yeah, do. Great. Thank you very much, everybody. That's really lovely to hear those comments.
Thank you for sharing that. I remember from the Cambridge reading, it does work really well visually, doesn't it, as well?
Yeah.
You see the the double-stranded feature of DNA, and that was a very nice reference to the science as well, I thought.
It took us ages to write it because of all the embedded coding that's within it and the fact that we wanted to get it as accurately as we could. And we had lots and lots of different versions, but it was really good. It was a really intense experience writing it, which is just what I needed at a time when I wanted to be distracted. And I told some of my doctors about it and they were very intrigued by what I was doing.
Yeah, it's really good.
Thank you.
Amazing. Well, let's move on then to Sarah Watkinson.
Well, that's certainly a hard one to follow. I've got 3 very short poems, and I would have shared my screen if I knew how securely how to get back into Zoom afterwards. But I find if I share a screen, I tend then to lock myself out. So anyway, my first poem is simply called the molecular structure as a title, which was my tutor Jenny Lewis's suggestion. So I'd better just describe the structure to you. The tetrapyrrole ring is like the most beautiful piece of lace work, and it's got a circle of pentagons around 4 nitrogen atoms that make a sort of square in the middle, and then little side chains, and it looks like a piece of carefully manufactured lace. And it's an essential molecule in life. If you have an iron atom in the middle, you've got the bit of hemoglobin that makes blood work. And if you put a magnesium ion in the middle, you've got chlorophyll that makes photosynthesis work. And so this is absolutely essential molecule. And I was very, very impressed by incredibly detailed structure of this thing. And I was taught about the origin of life and how molecules assembled and so forth. But how on earth does something like this make itself? So I used to say to people, surely this is an argument for intelligent design. A thing like this doesn't just happen. So I met a plant biochemist, a friend, Alison Smith, who's now a professor in Cambridge. And I confided to her that I was deeply skeptical about how on earth the tetrapyrrole ring could put itself together. But she said, yes, indeed, it had self-assembled. There's no reason why this can't. This is just all the bonds, energies satisfying themselves and falling into the most comfortable state, and it does happen. So this poem is dedicated to Professor Alison Smith. In primeval soup, you said, rings sprang to shape. Hexagons and pentagons snapped to spheres by chance. Gazebos, geodesic domes, nano-cities, self-built on microparticles, until this tetrapyrrole web trapped iron, an electron catapult, oxygen charged, blood red to quicken flesh. My next one refers to my very first experience of school organic chemistry. And you start with a very simple molecule. So organic chemistry is the chemistry of carbon. And the simplest carbon molecule you can make, more or less, is a paraffin. And that's just a chain of carbon atoms with hydrogens attached in a single chain, very regular. It has no internal stresses to speak of. It won't explode. It can be oily. And if the chain is longer, it becomes more and more inert and becomes waxy like candles. So this is called A Poem About Aliphatic Hydrocarbons. Paraffins, I learned, were for beginners, firm-strung daisy chains of atoms, tame in their reactions, though fire can be whipped from them by a wind. Winter nightfall, and ablaze in the wood at the end of our gardens was Mr. Maisie, lighting a pyre of boxes, marking the end of shop hours with a slosh of fuel and a match. Our paraffin lived in a red jerry can in the shed for filtering into stoves, a small warmth for coughing children, or to light a dim lamp in a power cut. A lit taper to a candle, and wax is vapor, a light in the air. Oil flows up the wick towards oxygen, their combustion, a silent glow. And finally, a tiny little poem called neonicotinoids. Neonicotinoids are chemically altered derivatives of nicotine, which is the part of tobacco, of course, which affects mood and activity. All animals have basically quite similar metabolisms. So neonicotinoids are used as landscape scale in agriculture, and they kill all insects, including vital pollinators, which is why they've been banned, and we hope the ban holds because we really need our pollinators. So this little poem goes like this. Neonicotinoids. Out at the back they huddle, turn off, tune out, ignore their office messages, tobacco calmed. Beyond the ring road, silent orchards stare up at an empty sky. The bees, receptors jammed, are all on auto reply. Thank you, that's it.
Lovely.
Sarah.
Do I understand correctly, Sarah, that first one you read, that ring that's made is actually like the instigator of life originally in the
It's
No.
a bit of the machinery. Stephen will explain this much better than I can. But it's part of a molecule that hands electrons on in oxidizing and reducing reactions, which are part of the whole way in which light becomes electricity. Light is converted into electrical energy in chlorophyll, and an oxidation, again, in the case of hemoglobin, drives the oxidation of foodstuffs, of glucose, which provides the energy for life in animals. So these are both sort of key in a redox chain of reactions, which are essential for energy transduction in both animals and plants. But
Thank you.
it just struck me when I first came to this, I was just so amazed that this beautiful molecule is behind plants and us. Extraordinary. And it has other redox functions too. And there's a vitamin B and cytochromes and so forth.
Thank you.
Stephen, I wish you'd enlarge on this because I.
Yes, I mean, there are simpler looking structures, Sarah, that were around, you know, at the beginning of the universe. You know, things like simple amino acids and even smaller compounds. But these structures are a bit bigger. They're like a level up in complexity, if you like, but are very fundamental.
Yeah. And
are biosynthesized by works of magic, really. You know, enzyme controlled steps, which is wonderful. And self-assembly may well be a theme that we could explore as a group at some point. And actually groups have tried to synthesize these kinds of pyrrole units, if you like, in the lab. And then you can compare how well that process is in terms of efficiency with nature. And of course it doesn't compare.
I think that's such an interesting idea, Stephen, because people, I think technocrats tend to think that anything we make is likely to be rather better than some sort of organic slimy thing that goes on in plants. But of course, these systems have been around long before we ever turned up.
Yeah, we're all fans of big slimy things here, so yes. No, it's no, I agree. We can't compete with nature at all.
But it's hard to get that idea across, isn't it?
It is.
And in the context of trying to persuade people that nature-based solutions for climate change mitigation are really not just a good idea, but essential. It's a very difficult idea to get across.
Yeah, there are cases where we can try to mimic nature, if you like, to generate a new class of drug molecules, perhaps, that may get round some side effect issues or toxicity and so on.
I wasn't thinking of you, I was thinking of the extraordinary naive things that get proposed.
Oh, no, absolutely. You know, and that's perhaps a communication channel that we could explore as well as a group. You know, the benefits of slime, the benefits of nature.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I love the way you use the words slime and magic. That's really quite heartening to someone who's not a chemist, I think. I really loved your last poem, that tiny little poem, The Silent Orchards. I thought, and the bees having their auto reply switched off, and I thought that was really, really wonderful and conveyed so much in just a really tiny poem.
Well, I think it reflects the fact I get obsessed by these things and very upset by what gets poured onto fields.
Definitely. Yeah.
I came across a paper where there was good evidence that neonicotinoids also confuse birds and stop them migrating in the right direction.
Really? Goodness me.
It's a big worry.
So, certainly, if you're interested in this, I recommend Photovoltaic, though, Sarah's collection, because that's the inspiration behind, you know, this conversion of light into electricity, and that's really captured beautifully in the book, I think.
Oh, thank you. I was very inspired there by Yadvinder Mali, who is an ecologist, in fact, but he's also a poet without realizing it, I think, and he has some marvelous phrases like captured sunshine. The idea that wood is actually captured sunshine.
Wow. What was his name, Sarah? Can you say that again?
He's Sikh, it's an Indian name, Yadvinder, Yadvinder,
Yeah.
Malhi.
Great. Thank you.
Yes, it feels these last 2 days we've had too much captured sunshine, but but yeah, that's a lovely phrase, isn't it? It really is.
I also loved, and I think Sarah put something in the chat about the image of the paraffin being stored away and what it was used for, and I thought you captured that really well. I remember paraffin heaters at home and how it was, the paraffin was all stored outside somewhere very safe, and
Yes.
yeah. No, I thought you conveyed that really well, and the whole sort of atmosphere of that experience.
Yeah, I felt that I could almost smell the paraffin.
Yeah.
When you were reading. It really became alive.
Very evocative, isn't it, of youth? I mean, my aunt and uncle had a very cold lean-to bathroom, and they used to have one of those tall grey units that was a paraffin heater. Yes. I just remember it so much, and when you talked about it, just immediately came back, and the smells of that bathroom. And
Thank you, Sarah. Amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing reading.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think we had Bill next, then Miranda. So are you ready, Bill?
Yep, I am. Yes. I sent you 4 poems originally, Stephen. I was just going to talk about them a little bit, and maybe that will mean cutting them down. So I might only read 3. We'll see how we get on. Now, I was really interested by Stephen's call, and I decided to offer some poems from a collection that I'm working on. It's set in some very small islands off the coast of County Mayo in 1902, which I know about because my grandfather went on an expedition there, and he left behind a photographic album, very few words. So I've worked off the photographs, and in those photographs you see a community which no longer exists, of fishing people making their living in the wilderness off the coast of Ireland. Scarcely conceivable now. And it occurred to me, or through getting to grips with this, it occurs to me that their whole world is made directly by the action of nature. For example, the mohair fields around the edge of the island are literally blown in by the wind. They consist of tiny fragments of seashell which are blown in and which are apparently fertile. So you get these beautiful fields of grasses and flowers which fed their livestock. Similarly, the islands are outcrops of rock, and that's where I started with the poem Bedrock, where I just let that feeling of the whole of life being shaped by the ground on which you're actually standing, which is a given of nature, speak. Then there's another one which is more perhaps within subject, Stephen, because it's called Still, and it's actually about illegal, it's about distilling spirits, which of course was a big thing in the islands off the west coast of Ireland, and battles, psychological and sometimes actual, with the revenue men who were trying to get their cut or suppress this completely. And then a poem called The Worm Moon, which is about spring taking off and getting to work the fields when the worms start appearing. And this again, this is the direct action of nature, the sun, telegraphed as it were by the moon. So this is the best I can do, and I hope you'll treat me as a kind of beginner in this. I don't have the learned grasp of molecules that the rest of you have, but here we go anyway. Here's the first one, bedrock. Your granite bursts and sets, bears the sky and carries ocean, turns to face southwesterlies, frames the beach where my boat lands, shelters meadows where my cattle graze. You house seabirds in your crevices, let seas hone rocks whose hidden teeth have smashed and drowned. Great clock, you time the stories of the world, the wandering continents, the falling dust between the stars. And then the still. With impeccable timing, my collection of poems has now fallen to pieces. So you may have to give me a second or two. Right, here we go. Still. Give me a nose for the sweetest malt barley. Take it nut brown, steep till it sprouts. Let me mix and brew mash and give life to strong spirit. Let mash murmur in the boiler. Let me know that thrumming, stilla, stillae, stillarum. A drop then drops. Let it stream from the neck. Aquae vitae, clear potent liquor from father to son. Let no excise man find it. Keep it hidden underground. Keep it from harm as I would my son. And finally, if I can find it. Oh, I've got to go backwards. Yep. The Worm Moon. And this is a different voice. This is one of the women on the island. And the Worm Moon is the full moon that occurs in March, the last of the winter equinox. It's named after the abundant number of worms seen at this time of year. So just when life is quickening again. Worm Moon glows from the sky. She says, get to your field and set your potatoes. The ground is alive and beetles run in the kelp. In the sea, hungry fish swim nearer the surface. My brothers are out for them. Your lazy beds are warm, says the moon. Rise with the lark, put on your work clothes, leave your cows in their byre. Their animal breath anchors my sleep. No house welcomes me. Even the door where I took my shame is shut. There.
Thank you so much, Bill. Amazing. Yeah, I think Sarah liked, yeah, the dust falling between the stars. Yeah, that was an amazing line. I enjoyed
That's
that.
interesting. The two of us put that up.
Yeah, it's really quite haunting. It was just sort of, it finished off the poem beautifully, but left you sort of hanging there, thinking about
Like with such a visual image, a strong image to sort of be lingering on. Yeah, definitely.
You really get these substances come across the granite, and the calcareous shells and the distillation is wonderful. I enjoyed your whiskey description of the mash, and I could almost smell it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good sensory detail in each of them, very distinct and very vivid. And also each poem had a really clear voice and a unique voice to the others, which I thought was
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by the worm moon as well. That's, yeah, I'm going to read about that.
Mhm.
Well, I'd come across that because I have a half allotment, so I'd experienced this magical turn when the earth heats up to the point where plants start to grow, vegetables start to grow. It's an amazing experience. And in the harshness of these islands, the islanders often literally made their fields. They would haul kelp, which is seaweed, up from the beaches. They would often have their fields, tiny fields, actually above the cliffs, because the islands often emerge almost vertically from the sea. It struck me as so extraordinary that they almost literally made everything. But the worms came somehow and found their kelp. It's like a huge, great big clock. I felt their island was like a very wonderful clock in touch with all the rest of nature. That's what I tried to find in the poem Bedrock. And this is something I think we've actually lost. Hence the sort of surprise that fires are happening all over the place. You know, if you mess it all up and leave loads of garbage all over the place, it's going to catch fire.
I think this makes your enterprise of focusing on these particular individuals incredibly powerful. I hadn't really, I mean, I've heard these poems, this growing work before and loved it, but this extra idea that these are people, human beings, who are dealing so directly with substances is quite a new angle to me. The idea that you would write about islands off the coast of Ireland with a view to, with a background understanding of substances, I think is absolutely marvelous.
Well, I think Paul's summons and this group has made me aware of that. You know, I think that it's going to take some time to let what you had an organizing principle before. I think you Sarah identified the molecule as an organizing principle, and I think that's what I need with this set of poems, especially around the people and their concerns with survival in this world. And I haven't heard yet how to organize. I'm talking from the poems. I'm sorry if this is hard to follow. I haven't let the poem speak to me yet properly about how they need to be set out so that others can relate to them. So preparing some of them for this evening is really useful. And so thank you, everyone.
No, thank you.
I thought they were great. Yeah.
Marvelous, marvelous.
Wonderful to see how, yeah, these very personal stories can talk around very, if you like, macro policy issues, really.
I think you're right, Bill, as well, that when you prepare something for a reading, it helps you to kind of think about it in a different way and how you're going to present it to others and how you're going to tell a coherent story about the work. And that's one of the joys of reading work aloud to others, isn't it? And performing with others.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. And the idea of like the earth tuning itself, and actually there are many molecules involved in kelp, for example.
All right.
Yeah, that could be worth exploring. I don't know, but
yeah.
And typical indigenous processes, did they burn kelp? They certainly used to burn lime, didn't they, to
I think they burnt peat.
Yes,
And they would even get peat when on their particular island they didn't have it. Another revelation is how much they were in touch with the rest of the world. It's really quite astonishing, and I haven't really explored that properly yet. So I don't know whether they burnt kelp.
No, I got it wrong.
But they certainly used it in their farming to grow potatoes, which is a very important staple.
Would they also eat it and make it into like lava bread and that kind of thing?
I don't know. I shall have to find out. Thank you.
Interesting.
Molecules in kelp. Amazing. I would like further correspondence on molecules in kelp. That sounds like a wonderful thing.
Yeah, perhaps we can have an Irish whiskey together.
Well, that would be really good. Yeah. I'm afraid I don't know how to make it though, and
well, we can buy some. It's okay. Yeah.
One of the most popular fertilizers at the moment is based on seaweed.
Yeah.
Seaweed and sequestered iron is quite a popular one. So I think that's interesting because it must have all the chemicals required for that fertilization and for the nutrients and the minerals as well involved that are needed.
Yes. Amazing.
Whole collection there then, Bill.
Well,
the kelp collection.
Kelp collection. Yes. What a wonderful idea.
Well, this has just been really stimulating tonight. Yeah. Thank you, Bill. So Miranda, the floor is yours.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to read 3 poems, as I said, from Formulations, which is the book that Stephen and I worked on together. So the process was that Stephen would select pairs of molecules that were somehow related. Either one was turned into the other and during a process, or some other link. And then I'd look at the chemical equation initially, which is where the first form was built, and then later on the skeletal structure, to figure out how I could translate that somehow into a new poetic form. So the first pair was geranyl pyrophosphate and limonene. The first ones, I wasn't quite as confident in my chemistry at the start. I took chemistry many years ago, but I really wanted to find my own way to understand it, which Stephen was incredibly patient with. So the poem I'm going to read is called Bright as Yellow. It is based on the geranyl pyrophosphate, which is the chemical equation for that is C10H17O7P2. And so basically I decided to start fairly simply with stanza 1 being 10 lines of 4 words each for carbon. So there's 10 carbons, and then where the 4 came from was the number of valence electrons in carbon. So I was using sort of basic numbers to create the structure. And then so for each of these stanzas, it was the number of words, was the valence electrons, and then how many molecules there were. So I'll read this one. It's called Bright as Yellow. It slices the air, a spike of joy. There's fine lemon mist, awakening atomized into scent. Squeezed by hand, wedges seep juice into cuts on your fingers, sting the morning with unexpected beauty like tears. You can't help being cleansed. Their crescents, flaring vesicles, appear treasures, borders candescent, albedo edges glistening, cup zests, rough grist, bring pungent gold over the waiting mixing bowl. I'm sorry, over the waiting glass bowl and prepare to mix. Combination never held a better promise than reaction. The bright acid rising into form. Mundane marvel, a silent wait, invisible transformations. The oven's dim work yields a whole delicious sun, brimming with halos. Vapors capture your memory, escapes toward glimmering warmth. And one other element to these poems is that where there is a double bond in the chemical molecule, then there needs to be a full rhyme. Where there is a single bond, it needs to be a slant rhyme. So that's part of how that was created. And just so you see how it looks on the page. So there's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and then the phosphorus at the end there. So from there, so there's 7 pairs of molecules in the, or sorry, yes, 7 pairs of molecules in the book, sorry. And then I'm going to read from, I think, the third. And it's the poem's called Sleeping Beauty's Epigenome. And I've actually got a few notes that I want to read from, because there's a few sort of words that you may or may not be familiar with. But for lysine, it plays a role in mainly in humans, most importantly proteinogenesis. There's the word histones in the poem. Again, you may be familiar with that in terms of those of you who've looked at DNA, but these are highly basic proteins abundant in lysine, and they act as spools around which DNA winds. So the histones actually prevent DNA from becoming tangled and from damage. So I was thinking about this, and this led me to thoughts about the sort of the story of Aurora, or Sleeping Beauty, also called Briar Rose, and how she pricked her finger on a spindle. And that, you know, in this story, all the spindles were destroyed, but the danger still came. And the whole kingdom was put to sleep to wake with her. Also, another sort of strand that came into the poem was this notion of the goddess Freya stirring the clouds, and the practice of Seder, which is believed to be a form of magic, both related to telling and shaping the future, but also just that spinning notion. So, and then distaff is a stick or spindle on which wool or flax is wound for spinning. So those are some of the ideas that were wound into it. And then also, in addition to the progress that we made from the different inspirations, was moving from the chemical equation to the actual skeletal structure. So in the beginning of each section, they have a picture of it, so you can see the lysine there at the top. And it's something that inspired the form, which you can see is here. And there's sort of a mirroring structure there. If you're interested in more about the way those are structured, you can get this. And then also you can get a much longer document online that goes into great deal. But anyway, I will read the poem now. Sleeping Beauty's Epigenome. Mother, Father, rid all the world, purify. Our world make it cured, purged of threats, toxins, poisons, gone. Loathe threads, spun on spindled threats. Dispel oracles, weaving fates within towers, temples. Oust every pollutant its last, and still our world will be spooled. Around that great wheel, years will pass and the needle will find us, a long sleep meanwhile. Meanwhile, dreams, streaming or clouds, golden cumulus, histone distaff, spooling mercurial threads, flax, polynucleotide chains, embroidered with harm. Aurora, cry of Freya, spin fates kinder. Take pains to remove, sane mind, bind threads that won't tangle. Lantern, cease, quench, extinguish the lightning. Will morning bring broken spells? We awaken and find ourselves well, released from the world's dark cells. And the last one is from the 5th pair, and it's called Hymn to Biosynthesis. So on top of, again, growing from the skeletal structure, for this one, I also explored the concept of geometric isomerism. So there's a specific part that it can either be rotated one way or rotated another way in 3-dimensional space. So again, that influenced the form. And this one is for the molecule 5-O-caffeoquinic acid, which is paired with caffeic acid. Hymn to Biosynthesis. 1. Prelude. Antidotes grow in spring. Find proof where the sun sings, on skins of fruits and rings beginning. 2. Benediction. Who puts up shields within us, where cells turn venal, feeble? Won't someone produce a potion proven? Could it come from woodlands, mushroom, berry, globe artichoke? What swollen droops, feathering folioles of ferns, thyme, peppermint, sage? What fragrant spices, star anise, Ceylon cinnamon, or seeds? Myriad forms may metamorphose and manifest, embodied, manifold, brewing this seeming panacea. 3. Sacrament. Antioxidant, antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, anti-diabetic, effective against viruses, bacteria, and anti-mutagenic. For benefits must be consumed, enter the bloodstream, absorbed. Canon and Rabussier. Leaves are simple, undivided, entire. Flowers epigynous, enfolded, enveloped. The stamens are epipetalous, centermost. The stamens are alternapetalous. Anthers are longitudinal in dehiscence to disperse. Pollen, dust the stigma. This makes possible the fruit, the harvest. In turn, we drink, remake. Simple, undivided, entire, dispersed and divulged. As harvest, we dehiss when unfolding is required, splitting wide open. This seeming panacea folded into the fruiting body, now proven dichotomous. Let the world behold, absorb. To dust the stigma, rebirth is possible. Anima enigma.
Hey, Miranda, brilliant.
I found very useful, interesting that use of dehiscence in that last. Is that's the splitting open, presumably?
Yeah. I think that the Rabussier was one of the plants that had this particular molecule within it, and so I was looking at how that plant behaved, or other plants that had it in, and the sort of the notion of how the reproduction happened, and how the growth happened, sort of informed the poem. And that, yeah.
Very, very interesting for me, because in nursing a wound that doesn't heal and splits open is called a dehisced wound, and it was something I've never heard it in any other context before, so it was really interesting to hear that. But it immediately made sense to me because of my knowledge of it in a different use. Yeah, interesting.
I love that second poem. the way you, and it's interesting the way how you were using weaving and distaff, and the kind of parallel with my poem. And I love the way you integrated that whole sort of fairy story of Aurora and the deep dark, as it were. Yeah, I thought that worked really well, really effectively.
So it was a really fun project. Yeah, getting so deep into the structure of how the molecules were built, and then creating these forms that were quite complicated and quite elaborate sometimes. It was really interesting how it forced certain things with the language that otherwise you might, not have done in a poem. And so I thought that it was a way of getting to intimately know a part of nature that at this sort of very small scale, as we were talking about, in a way that I don't think I would have ever done any other way. So I think it's really exciting to do that.
And it's a really major thing to take on the structure for its own sake. I mean, that's difficult, isn't it? I think I agree with Sarah Bryson. I'd love to see the structures on the page or by screen sharing. I think they'd be synergistic.
Yeah, I think that's something I should have probably thought to do. I didn't.
I like the way when you focus on structure, it really gives you a kind of tension to work with as a writer, doesn't it? And you're working with the structure, and it really kind of restricts what you can do, but at the same time, it puts a pressure on your own creativity, which is a really wonderful challenge, I think.
Absolutely. I think that was the real pleasure of it, is that, it does. I think sometimes the blank page can be incredibly intimidating, and there's sometimes when you walk into something that's just such a very strict structure that you have to work in. Again, it could be anything, there's an actual freedom in that tension and that structure that you have to follow. So.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
It's a very interesting application of experimental form too.
Yeah. I think it was really, really quite fun. Very, very, very intense. I didn't have, like I said, I didn't have an extremely solid background in chemistry, and so it was something where I spent hours just really educating myself on how it worked from a kind of basic level, so that I could be really accurate in the things that I wanted to do with the forms, because otherwise I feel like I wasn't honoring the system of knowledge that I was working with. I think that's important when poets engage with science. I think obviously, being as accurate as you can, whatever level you're at, even if it's basic, just really honoring what's already there within it is so important.
I so much agree. And I always find it's terribly wide of the mark if a person writes a science poem just by dropping in some words that look sciencey. It really is to belittle and not exactly your word honor is right. I think it's so important that the disciplines honor each other properly.
Absolutely. And I think that it's also a failure as a poet in terms of language. If you're not using the language in its full context, or at least trying to, then I think it's a failure on both sides.
Yes.
I think it was Miroslav Holub, which is a Czech poet who is involved in immunology. He wrote a lot of poetry as well, and he also explored, poetry and science and that intersection. And he said using, keeping the bones of science when you write science into poetry is so important. So I've always kind of keep that phrase in my head. It's important to keep the bones.
He's one of my favorite poets, Miranda.
Yeah, mine too. He's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I think through the whole process, Miranda, I remember you going to great lengths to intimately get to know the structures of each compound. And I always say to my students as well, it's good to actually make a model of the compound a 3D model using ball and sticks or whatever, and you actually get to appreciate what it actually looks like.
Mm.
You know, but yeah, I agree. The journey that you go on with pairing science and poetry together like this takes you to a whole new place that for me was really unexpected.
Mm. Absolutely.
But exciting too. Yeah.
Yeah, no, very much so.
And I mean, you talked about, you know, when you needed it most, it was that poem that you wrote with your collaborator. A lot of this collaboration took place over the pandemic, and it was just something I could completely bury myself in and be so absorbed with it that I couldn't think about anything else. And so it was, in that way, just really immersing myself in it. It was kind of therapeutic, honestly. Anyway, thank you all for.
Thank you.
No, thank you for reading, Miranda. So Sarah B,
Hello.
over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to read 3 poems today. And again, it links into a pamphlet I'm trying to put together. It's actually called Egg White and Oxygen. And when I started my nurse training in March 1980, it was on the cusp really of nursing being a sort of hands-on learned, this is how we've always done it type profession, to leaning towards much more evidence-based practice and only doing things when you've got a scientific reason for doing something. But of course, you've got a lot of old school nurses who don't see why we should be changing. And so a few of the poems in this are related to that. So the first one is called Evidence-Based Practice 1. And I'm just going to see if I can share it. Can you see that? Can you see that?
Yeah.
Evidence-Based Practice 1. We were warned before going out onto the wards about archaic treatments, those ways passed down through generations and old style matrons, just because that's the way we've always done it. The senior tutor impressed upon us the mantra of evidence-based practice. We must never consider that a potential pressure point could be massaged with meths to toughen the skin, or that a Sorbo ring would be wise for a patient to sit upon, or that a bed sore could benefit from egg white and oxygen. Oh no, there are better ways of doing things, she said. You are the new faces of nursing, the next generation. It's up to you to question, challenge all those outdated ways. She scanned our eager to please smiles, nearly 60 of us, mainly girls of 18 or so, all brought up to defer to our elders, all taught to do as we were told. She tilted her head forward, as if to bestow this responsibility onto her protégés. I am somehow reminded of Miss Jean Brodie. So that was one, and I've actually written a series of evidence-based practice poems, and I'm just going to read you the third one, but it's down on page 21, so 1 second while I find it. Bit of music to keep us going, right. Share screen. Is that it there?
Yep.
Evidence-based practice 3. Next was mouth care. We are shown how to dip gauze in a solution of weak soda bic, then wrap it round a forefinger to wipe inside the buccal cavity, are warned, beware if a patient may bite. Next, in pairs, we try this method out until someone gives a fake nip for a round of giggles. To bring us back in line, the tutor raises her voice. On the chemo ward, she said, they rinsed their mouths with H2O2 diluted in a strict regime every 2 hours to reduce infection risks. Their lives may depend upon it.
Mm.
So another topic completely, I'm now going to do a poem about something else entirely, and now for something completely different, as they say. And this is to do with my photography, really. In focus. The sun's out after fine drizzle, and the fresh new lupin leaves are festooned with lit droplets, each held by minuscule hairs. And my mind wanders about the science of surface tension, of polarity's attraction to hydrogen bonds and cohesion, and to the light's refraction and my reflection through tiny globes, the symmetry and proportions of the leaves and their fine color. All this is nature's science, demonstrated momentarily, waiting for the next stage of the water cycle, evaporation, to change it, but captured now through a lens of man-made technology, a fixed image of wonder. That's my three.
I love that last one.
Yeah, me too. Love the way you combine science and photography in that. It's brilliant.
Thank you, thank you. That's probably the most relevant one for this evening, but that was probably the only one I had that was most relevant, so I had to go elsewhere.
Yeah, I love
Well,
it.
bits of a molecule liking water or not liking water is so basic to the slimy machine.
Yes.
I'm just wondering how dilute the H2O2 needs to be
Mm.
in poem 2. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, that's a very good question, Stephen, because actually it was a bit like the soda bic. It was a bit of this, a bit of that, and it was not scientific. And I think nowadays it would be, but as I said, we were on that cusp of changeover. Yeah. Yeah.
It would be interesting. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say it'd be interesting if you could maybe do it like a chapbook of the poems with your photography, but also some of your photos along with it. I think that would be a really neat combination.
I could probably find a photo to go with that specific poem, definitely the third one. Yeah, that would be interesting. I'm not sure I could find it promptly now.
No, I mean the poem itself is visual enough. It's just I think it's kind of can be quite interesting to, you know, pair images and photos. Yeah.
Well, as I said before, I think on the chat that because the Facebook page that you've set up, Stephen, is a private one, if we put things on there, they're not considered to be published. So I could put it up there with an image if you like. Yeah.
Great.
I think there was a lot of science in your poems there. It's really good.
Good.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to have to leave you all now, guys, but it's been really great to meet you all tonight, and I'm really excited about this group. It's just really made me buzz, and I've written loads of notes about all those complicated science words that people have used that I don't know what they mean. So
Thank you, Sue. Nice to meet you.
they're really
Yeah,
nice to meet
keep
you.
in touch, Sue. Take
Yeah,
care.
will do. Yeah, yeah. Cheerio.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, I've got time for just 3 poems myself, if that's all right.
Good.
Hope everyone's not too knackered. But I've got a couple of, if you like, tribute poems to fairly fundamental science, dipoles and carbon. And then I've also got one from formulations as well that I'll read, if that's all right. So the first one is called Dipoles. Linus Pauling was a savvy fellow. His scale did not slide. It passed scrutiny. His mind centered on charge separation. Bond energies were his serum and score. They were underpins, supporting concrete, the hard science of electrons and their moves, their level of attraction to atoms. Pauling gave us dipole moments, moments to think, to perceive all chemical bonds, polar bonds like true north and deep south, polar ketone groups, positive carbon, negative oxygen on horizons of charge, bleached by sheer organic distance. So when we think of nucleophilic attack at a positive carbon, we are standing on a crag of metaphor. The teasing threshold comes as the flatness springs into 3D. The tetrahedron, the intermediate that collapses. Okay, and then I've got one from Formulations now. And this poem was inspired by linolenic acid, which belongs to the fatty acid group of compounds that Sarah will know all about. But they're also found in many seeds and oils, walnuts, hemp, and vegetable oils. And linolenic acid can be used as a cosmetic in formulations. So I followed Miranda's excellent form for this poem that was based closely to its chemical structure. A cosmetic fairy tale. 1. Flax wraps a gift in seeds. Beams echo along the laboratory's narrow fresco, the art of isolation. Placement of linseed oil celebration. Taken headlong, dried, yellowish then drawn. Adorn, breeze of Deutschland, seeds, schemes, squeezed and solvent beads concede. 19th century high road, heartbeat between nations and hard places, abrasive consumers and famous faces, racing. 2. Decades later, helpful utilities translate, edgeways, sabres flash across dried acres, papers incarnate that speak of varnish, smartness, valid in trusty linolenic acid. Massive futures are told by tutors, rumours cascade of a cosmetic fairy tale. Embrace the oil's beneficial demeanour, sweeping away acne, making inflammation leaner. Under imaginative lights, skin is cleaner. Concealer. Okay, and then the last poem is called For Carbon. And I've been playing around with Abecedarian poems. So the first line of each, the first letter of each line follows the alphabetical sequence. And I've done that for this one, and all the lines have 7 syllables. So For Carbon. An atom like no other, between soft rock and a hard carbon form, we applaud its deft touches and its vital essence. We cheer the normal 4 bonds with other atoms. Green fields and healthy bodies, harvest your deeds, your presence in chemie, from ancient soups, jostling with microbes, to a kinase-driven set of goals. Laissez-faire to all gardens. Mottle the ways that we live, nurture our natures, then sit on a basis for breath that purports to have true meaning. Quaque hora, you bless us, rich in 3D trim and shape. Stay with us on our journey to fearful places. We need Under Armour and New Thought, verges of need, fibre and ways of treating new illness. X-rays try to be like you. Eve, Tongi try to be you. Zorro would salute you, sir. Thank you.
Really interesting. I loved all the sibilants in that that first one. There's lots of S sounds. Second one, sorry.
I enjoyed all three. I'd like to hear that one again, that where you talked about the crag of metaphor.
Yes.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was me as well.
I feel with yours, Stephen, that I need to know a bit more science than I do. Just feel the gap.
Yeah, sure. Well, I can share some of the thinking behind them if you like.
I think one of the problems is when we're just hearing them and we can't see them. The thinking space is compressed, isn't it, in terms of trying to hold on to the words and also thinking about what the science is at the same time. So I would definitely benefit from seeing the poems, I think.
What do you feel? What do you feel? I'd be interested to hear what people feel about for very extensive endnotes that explain science, which is what Steve Ely did in his book, The European Eel. So that was based on an enormous amount of understanding the science and talking to experts. And as a result, the endnotes themselves make almost like a new poem.
Yes.
And bring the whole thing together. And maybe we're sometimes allowed to do some explaining in that way when we're talking about such specialized matters.
That's an interesting discussion, Sarah, because when I took what I've done with so far with my pamphlet to Jenny in terms of to just talk about how to take it further, she feels that I need a glossary at the back for all the nursing terms. And I think sometimes when you're in an area of knowledge, you don't know what other people don't know, do you? So
Right.
I think it's useful.
Sorry, I went off on a different text, Stephen, because I think we were hoping you were about to read that poem again that had the crag of metaphor in it.
Sorry.
No, it was my fault. I would.
Yes, I will have to just locate it again. Sorry.
While Stephen's finding his poem, I just wanted to show you that we didn't actually include a glossary in formulations.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
Because we knew that there would probably be some terminology that wasn't familiar. So there's a brief chemical glossary that's about 1.5 pages that, it covers things like covalent bond and things like that.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Poetic glossary that covers couplets, meter, that sort of thing. It's not
Brilliant. So
terrible,
the crossover, yeah.
yeah. I think that was the publisher Jo Dark's idea. She
Yes.
thought that would be a good idea, and I thought, yeah, we want it to be as accessible as possible.
Yes.
And so, yeah, the really extensive appendix is an online counterpart that didn't go in the printed book. So if somebody really wants to dig into the science, they can.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry. Go ahead, Stephen.
No. I think that was really useful. The glossary. Yeah, and I can share my screen and show you the poem if you like, Sarah.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Let me try that. Can you see that?
Quite
Yes.
small.
Maybe zoom in a little bit.
Uh,
That's better. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you see that now?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
great.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you want me to read it or can you
Yes.
just read it?
May we hear it again, please?
Yeah. Okay, dipoles. Linus Pauling was a savvy fellow. His scale did not slide. It passed scrutiny. his mind centered on charge separation. Bond energies were his serum and score. They were underpins, supporting concrete, the hard science of electrons and their moves, their level of attraction to atoms. Pauling gave us dipole moments, moments to think, to perceive all chemical bonds. Polar bonds like true north and the deep south, polar ketone groups, positive carbon, negative oxygen on horizons of charge, bleached by sheer organic distance. So when we think of nucleophilic attack at a positive carbon, we are standing on a crag of metaphor. The teasing threshold comes as the flatness springs into 3D, the tetrahedron, the intermediate that collapses.
It's beautiful.
Mm.
Yes, I really like that. And it goes full on with the structure, which is so difficult to do.
So did you then have in your glossary Pauling to say who he was and what his science had shown? Was that the sort of level of glossary you might have had?
I might have done this. This poem hasn't appeared anywhere apart from
Okay.
my blog. It's going to be part of a collection. I probably would explain who Pauling was and what he was trying to do at the fundamental level.
Yes.
To explain how atoms interact with each other.
I mean, I'm at the stage of I'd heard of him, but I wouldn't been able to tell you exactly what his work was. So
yeah, so he was very interested in electrons and how they move around the outside of atoms, and how charge can develop a field, if you like,
yeah.
Around atoms. And his principles explain chemical reactions.
Yeah.
And in this poem, we talk about how you can change the shape of a molecule from 3D, like a tetrahedron, to becoming flat or backwards again. And that could all be explained by his work.
I'm making notes, that's why I'm looking to
Stephen, when you see the poem on the page, as well as hearing you read it, it is such a strong natural poem that I think a non-scientist gets a lot out of it as you've written it. The sense of order, the sense of manipulating a sense of order, and the sense of getting underneath the order to the organizing principle, I think are all very strong in that poem. And I really like the form that you've used.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'd love to read a whole collection just like that.
Yes.
I really would like that.
Well, you've inspired me to carry on then. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, thank you. I tried to do Pauling justice there. He deserves it.
I believe he had a slightly terrifying reputation. Did he not scare the two researchers who were working on the structure of DNA when they heard that he was about to investigate the topic himself? And they thought, better get our skates on or he'll find the answer before we've got, past the third subparagraph.
Yes, indeed.
I think in my mind there's something to do with sickle cell anemia, is there?
I think he certainly been active in medicine.
Yeah.
And some of his principles would have led to some understandings in that area.
Yeah. I had a feeling that maybe that's where I've heard the name more, but
I really do feel that we're in the creative common ground here, because it's at this level of forces and the involvement of electricity
Mm.
in shape that gradually one can get, even if your chemistry is not up to it, as mine isn't, you can still feel that you have a mental vision of the truth that lies there.
That's really interesting that you mentioned truth. Yeah, no, I agree. And you see these same kinds of images and pictures on the massive scale. You know, in your collection, Blue Dot Abroad, you talk about space, don't you? And those interstellar forces, if you like. We're just, if you like, shrinking that down to the subatomic level here. It's just a different kind of force, different level of attraction, if you like.
Yeah, one of the things that I looked at when I was doing my thesis was this concept called ratios of meaning. And it had to do with, you know, understanding measurement to a degree and having things to compare to one another in order to grasp a sense of meaning about something. And I think whether it's, you know, a scale like, yeah, you know, like space or you know, or the cosmos, or something as small as a proton or a molecule, I think having poetry provides ratios of meaning to people who might not grasp that same sense of meaning if it was just explained to them in science alone. And I think that's one of the ways that poetry can help create knowledge and contribute to understanding, and is by providing that sense. And I think that, you know, metaphor can be abused when it comes to science, certainly, but I think if it's applied well, it can contribute to those ratios of meaning really effectively.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
What are the, just really briefly, because it was in my mind when we were talking about sort of the tricky thing about, you know, whether or not somebody's familiar with the science or not. You know, I think there's different approaches. If it's just a little bit of information that they need, I think you can maybe do an epigraph or a footnote, you know, or if there's something else that's needed, maybe, you know, something with a note at the back of a book or something. But I think that's a really interesting area of figuring out, you know, how to engage the reader who may be a lay reader. And I think it's an important area to explore as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I was interested to hear about, you know, poems emerging from the endnotes or the footnotes, Sarah.
I'm really quite a fan of Steve Ely. And
Yes.
I think he wrote an essay about the theory behind his writing of the European eel called, I think it's called Body of Darkness or something like that. I could send it to you if you're interested.
Very much so.
But it was about really understanding the science behind something, but also finding the shore where the science gives up and we don't know, and then writing imaginatively into that space, which you can do if you're a poet, but not if you're a scientist.
I'd be very interested in that.
I can imagine if we shared poems and the scientific rationale behind it separately, each of us could probably write a poem based on the rationale. And we might get something really interesting.
I'm thinking about the format that Ruth Padel used in that 52 ways of looking, is it 52 ways of looking at a poem, I think it's called,
Yeah.
where she had the poem on one page and then she had the analysis of the poem on the other page. But in a way, with this sort of work, you could do almost the poem on one page and then the sort of the way you came to that poem and the science behind it on the opposite page. And I think that would be a very good and accessible format to reflect the science and make it open to a bigger population, maybe.
It's something that conciliants do well, isn't it? They do share the rationale behind as well. But it's a really interesting idea though, Sarah, to explore.
I think for me, who's got a fairly logical brain, that idea of having the way into the poem on the page opposite it can be very useful. and to understand how somebody got to that point with the poem.
Yeah, very much so.
And when we were talking about, you know, the science of small things against versus big things, I wonder if anybody else has started to listen to the Infinite Monkey Cage on Radio 4. And they were talking about black holes. I'll find the link and post it up because it's actually absolutely fascinating, because it's talking about how the physics as we worked out on planets, you know, where we are now, they're working at how it might apply out in the big space and in black holes. And it's just an absolute fascinating listen, because it was done by different people of knowledge, different levels of knowledge and understanding. But I'll post about it. It's done in quite a sort of jokey manner, but it's good. I'll find it.
Brilliant. Thank you. I might read more about Pauling as well. He, you know, he won 2 Nobel Prizes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is pretty impressive. Fantastic. Well, that was a real tour de force and loads of fun.
Thank you very much for
Thank you very
organizing
much. Thank you, Stephen.
Does anyone have any other thoughts, or maybe we just need time to think and see where?
Are you going to make the poems that we've read this evening available, Stephen? Because I'd very much like to see yours so I can read them properly.
Well, I'd be happy to, if everyone else is.
And then you mentioned a challenge where we might write poems into response. I took it to some stimulus we generated, whether deliberately or as a byproduct of what we're talking about. That sounds very interesting thing to do as well. And then lots of you have mentioned and used diagrams. I remember being told that if you've ever got a problem, you've got to try and draw a picture of it, because unless you can see the problem in some way, you can't really get on with it. And seeing and in some way communicating or describing what you see is so important in poetry. Poetry is, we're told, is about show.
Sorry.
And if you want to show someone something, I think you've got to be able to see it yourself. Otherwise, I think you probably can't do that. So lots of you seem to be seeing things very clearly. And it would be interesting to see some of your images. Or I would be interested in seeing some of the images.
This is just an example of one of the molecules where I scribbled all over it in order to figure out where things connected. And then I divided it up into stanzas. So I've got a lot of little scribbly diagrams.
I would love to see those. That would be so interesting.
Sure, I'll show some.
Helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I think pictures help the reader, don't they? But also can help the writer as well, can't they? Yeah, so I'll have a think about a potential challenge or a way in which we can share ideas.
Stephen, can I ask, are most of the people in this group Oxford based? I mean, I know Bill and Sarah and I are relatively close, but I don't know about anybody else.
No, it's an international group now.
Yeah, okay.
And scientists, but some really well-known poets in the group as well. And I'm sure, spread the word, there'll be others coming next time.
I guess I was thinking about a face-to-face get-together, but of course, if a lot of people are a long way away, that won't work. But
no, well, I mean, Oxford's a fairly good place. It's reasonably central, isn't it?
Yes.
A number of us have very good contacts there.
But where are you based?
I'm based near Horsham in Sussex.
Okay.
but there is a coach that goes from Gatwick to Oxford, and Gatwick's not far from here.
No. But just a thought, because I think we're all missing, aren't we, getting back to that normal contact.
No, yeah.
Seeing people.
It's just a case now of, I think, getting some funding really, potentially for a meeting in person. But yeah, I'd love that.
I am so sorry. I'm going to have to go. It's almost 9. I apologize, but thank you so much for this evening. It was just a real pleasure hearing everybody's words, and
Thank you.
Stephen for organizing. It's been great.
Pleasure. Thank you. Yeah, we'll draw things to a close anyway. So
All right, take care, everyone.
Good night.
Hope to see you soon. Bye.
bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Yeah, I'll be in touch.
That's great.
Keep writing.
We
Yeah.
will.
Well.
Okay,
Thank
good
you,
evening.
Stephen. Bye for
Thanks.
now.
Bye.
Bye.